All right, we are back with Davien from Jackfroot. Now, Davien, we're in this age of coronavirus. I'm sure that things have changed in your life, both professionally and personally. What's different? Now that you're in lockdown, how have things changed in your life, or how's it changed business?
It's both pros and cons. So on top of this, I also do a lot of marketing and social media for a lot of different businesses that don't know how to market their brand. So before this, we were like traveling like 100 miles per hour, and then all of a sudden February hit, and then bam, the shutdown hit, and everything was on pause. So at the same time, it was very depressing and like just you hear all these stories, businesses shutting down, and there's nothing you can do, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm a very positive, optimistic guy, and I always try to see things with the glass half full.
Mm-hmm.
So I started thinking like, what else can we do to really just turn a negative into a positive?
Mm-hmm.
So I connected back to one of the old partners with Jackfroot, and we've been in talks and working on a lot of artwork and designs, and really looking at the future now and see how can we navigate through this storm and bring something positive out of this.
Mm-hmm.
So we're working on a lot of like new artwork and merch that will inspire people and really kind of empower them in a sense where it gives them hope that we have something that people can look forward to.
Yeah.
Because I don't think there's anything really out there that is really doing it in a way where we envision. So I think out of this whole pandemic and this quarantine, that the positive that I see that's coming out of it is it's uniting Asians on a level that we once talked. I talked about with my partner Kai 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. Like, what's wrong? How come the Asians aren't aligned or in sync?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason was like Filipinos only care about Filipinos. Koreans don't care about Vietnamese. Like you got the Japanese, they're into themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But then now all of a sudden, it took a disaster or a crazy world catastrophe to finally get everyone on the same page.
Yeah.
So, that I think that's the good thing that came out of this.
Yeah. The weird thing is, you're right in the sense that a lot of Asian Americans are, um, they don't have as much of a sense of solidarity, especially for immigrant families who come over here and they're like, oh, um, day one, it's like, oh, I don't trust Japanese people or I don't trust Chinese people, and sometimes we forget that, when our immigrant families come over here, they come here with the history of what it was like in their place, in their hometown, and sort of the historical conflicts that they had. But unfortunately, those dynamics are completely different when you come to the United States. When you're in the United States, like, people don't really care if you are Chinese or Japanese, whatever. Like, you're still a chink. They're still going to be targeted for this type of racism. I mean, obviously there are a lot of nuances to that, but yeah, it has always been very difficult to try to um,
Unite.
unite the Asian community.
Yeah.
But on the subject of the coronavirus, I think one of the biggest issues facing the Asian community right now, obviously, is the increase of violence and racism directed at us. I know you guys post a lot about these issues. When you see these cases and you're forced to watch these videos of Asian people being targeted, how does that make you feel? Like, how does that make you feel about being Asian American today?
At first, like the first story that really triggered me was that Asian man in SF. And when I saw that, I was like, damn, I can't stay quiet about this. And I know the news isn't gonna cover or talk about it. So we posted it and we kept like this video up where it had a caption that saying that the SFPD was there and they didn't do anything, but it was actually like some rent a cop or security. And so that kind of led to this domino effect where like uh, people started submitting and sending all these crazy stories. And
Mm-hmm.
I thought maybe this would just be temporary and this is just going to be like a couple of times event like that will just go away. But bam, nonstop, these stories just kept coming in, and the attacks came. The attacks with the father and a 2 year old boy in Texas that got
Yeah,
cut his
yeah.
face cut up, and and just seeing like racist white nurse that say like, "Oh, Chinese people are disgusting," and it just kind of led this domino effect where I was like, I can't just sit there and be quiet. I think people need to speak up right now, and
Hmm.
so it led to this point where now the inbox is filled with stories nonstop, and it's not even just racism anymore. It's now crimes, just it, and even if we've had post things where we defended against Mexicans, right? You got black people that are egging and punching and robbing the Mexican food vendors.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, it's becoming this point where I feel like we're Batman. We're fighting crime. So
Hmm.
it's crazy.
I guess sort of my pushback on that um, is, one of the difficult things, and I know this because talking about Asian issues, and especially when you talk about Asian issues where Asian people are um, the victims of harassment or abuse at the hands of another community of color, it can be really difficult because it's easy to break down white supremacy, and it's easy to be like, okay, it's this guy did this because Donald Trump and blah 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 blah, and like you can sort of like break these things down, but then once you start getting into communities of color targeting other communities of color, it just becomes incredibly difficult. I think my concern, especially since I've always been passionate about speaking up for Latino and Indigenous and Black communities, is how often those discussions and those types of posts can sometimes um, invite. And I know that you've seen this, and I've seen you know, have the backs of Latinos and Black people when Asian people do this. But I know you've seen this where Asian people will come in there and they'll use this as an excuse to be like, oh well, Black people are this or Black people are that, and
Yeah.
that's just one of the I feel like it's one of the dangers. It's kind of like when white people try to share a video of like an Asian person in China, like at a wet market, and they're like, oh well, Asian people are all like this, and it's just like it's one of those things where it ends up becoming a story that becomes cherry picked, and it's sort of used to paint that entire community and in a negative light. And so I guess that's my only concern, is that like and it's not you, it's sort of the Asian community in general, because I think the Asian community, and I know that you've seen this growing up in East Side San Jose, it's like there are a lot of Asian people who can be very anti-black. Like I remember
Definitely.
growing up, and I had a lot of those tendencies because I grew up in that in a neighborhood where it's like Asian people just naturally felt like they could act like that. And so it's just something that I feel like Asian people need to sort of program themselves and learn from it, because the last thing that we want to do in our quest to highlight Asian people is to unintentionally step down on another community of color.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I agree. Sometimes there's been I have a friend that's Jamaican, and I've known him since junior year in high school, and he's always like message me, yo, why you always posting things that make black people look um like they're criminals, or but and then I explained to him, because I always go back and forth with him throughout the past 10-15 years that I've known him, and he always does this thing where let's say we get into some incident or event somewhere or a restaurant, or and something happens, like let's say we're going to a club, and
Mm-hmm.
then he'll always bring up this line that he says, "What is it because I'm black?" And I'll be like, Lloyd, stop saying that, stop doing that. You keep playing this victim that people are discriminating you because of that, right? Maybe it could be, but his mentality is kind of like stuck in this way where like he thinks that people are all out to get him because he's black, and I've been trying to get him to stop thinking like that, right? And so this goes back to now where sometimes when I post like a black person kicking that lady in the face, he'll
Mm-hmm.
be like, "Why do you keep posting this?" And I'm like, "It's because the news won't do it, and so we need to create these awareness, and we need to get this out there so that these things will stop."
Mm-hmm.
And and then I'm like, you keep thinking that I'm trying to put black communities down, but I post about whites, I post about Mexicans, right? So it's like how he just one sided. All he sees is one. He's seeing all he wants to see, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I tell him, I'm like, and I justify it, and then he goes quiet again. So you know, and yeah, I'm not trying to put any community down. I'm just creating awareness in a sense and opening up discussion.
Yeah, like I think to that point, um, oops, my mic was up. I think to that point, um, you know, like that video that you posted about, which was really fucked up. You know, a bunch of teenagers like jumped and kicked an elderly Asian person square in the face. You know, that's complete assault. And again, that's one of those difficult things where it's like we should be able to talk about that as a negative incident itself, regardless of if that person was Asian or not, or that person was, or the person who was assaulting the person was, you know,
The color, yeah,
Latino or black or whatever. Like we should be able to talk on that on the merits of its own, because it's not as if that person's actions speak to the entirety of black people or anything like that.
right, yeah,
But I also think that, like, to your friend's credit, it's just one of those things where it's like it's just difficult. It's kind of like it's kind of like talking to white people about like what it means to be Asian during the coronavirus. It's like they don't get it. Like when you
yeah,
like when we tell white people like, yo man, like you can't be unsensitive about this whole mask thing. Like you realize that it's totally different being a white person not wearing a mask, but an Asian person not wearing a mask, it's very different, you know? And it's just
yeah.
one of those things where it's for a lot of black folks, it's sort of the same thing where it's like some people, you know, like I can only imagine if we had to deal with this coronavirus shit our whole entire lives, you know. And I know that for a lot of black folks, like they've said that that's what their lives have been like, is constantly being seen as, you know, not being given the benefit of the doubt and always being treated as someone who's suspicious. So I can see where they're coming from, but I can see what you're talking about not always trying to, you know, lean on race as an explanation for everything. But I do think that, and especially since you and I talk about race, I do think that race is a really important factor. It's just one of those things where, um, you know,
It's like a double-edged sword.
yeah, and I hate to simplify it, but you're right in the sense that it really is a double-edged sword because, you know, if like say for example the issue going on in China, with the Chinese government discriminating, against African residents and kicking them out because they think that they have coronavirus. It's like it's
Yeah,
one of those things where like
I,
we bring that up as a means to criticize the Chinese government, but then a lot of people will say that as an explanation for why they don't want to trust Asian people. You know, so it's difficult because, you know, when you put out a news story, people are going to interpret it different ways, and so you can the best that you can do is just try to frame it as honest and as inclusive as possible, just so that way at least you don't like incite people talking shit. But as you know, it's difficult to get people to follow along. Um,
yeah.
Now, another topic that you and I spoke about, was the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. You know, the innocent man who was shot by these two racist white dudes. And again, I'm glad that you spoke about this because I feel like there aren't enough Asian Americans who have the balls to stick up for Black and Brown communities. As a leader within the Asian community, why do you think it's important for Asian Americans to be more inclusive and to to not just see themselves as, you know, oh, I only have to stick up for Asian people? Like why do you think, and why would how would you encourage other Asians to sort of branch out?
So I feel like I hear sometimes I talk to a lot of black followers and people from their community, and they would be like, "Oh yeah, the other pages don't want to post about Asians because they feel like that Asians don't support them." And
Mm-hmm.
so I started trying to look at it at their angle and put myself in their shoes, and I'm starting to think like maybe they do uh, think that way, and they don't see the support that we give them. And I'm trying to think if I seen anything recently or what other things are out there that speak that have Asians speaking about blacks, and I can't think of any off the top of my head. And so I
Mm-hmm.
started having a different approach, and I was like, we someone needs to step up to the plate and be take the lead and say if we want them to support us, we need to start supporting them and showing and leading by example, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes when I post about things to support black people, I can tell some of the followers get confused, but I'm trying to slowly, in a sense, do it in time where they start getting the picture of what we're doing, right?
Yeah.
And because at the same time, I don't want them to piss them off or get them to unfollow us or stop supporting us. But so I posted about the mod thing because we need to start really uniting in a way where we got to support the community, and
Yeah.
so it's a two-way street, you know.
Yeah. And I totally agree. And I think like you were saying, a lot of times people are like, oh, they don't support us. Why should we support them?
Yeah,
And I think what I like to tell a lot of Asian Americans in particular, um, is that Black people have a long history of supporting Asian Americans. I mean, if you're talking about one of the most important uh, sort of icons of American culture, Muhammad Ali was one of the most vocal people against the Vietnam War. He refused to join the war because he didn't see Vietnamese people as his enemies. He said, those people aren't my enemies. I'm not going to go to the war, to this war to go kill innocent Vietnamese people like you guys, as in white people. He said, you guys are my enemy. You guys are the ones who are oppressing me and making my life worse. It's not these Vietnamese people. And it's like throughout history, there have been so many cases where it's like the changes to civil rights laws um, were made possible because there were a lot of Black civil rights leaders who were pushing, for better rights for the treatments, of Asian people. And when
yeah,
Asian people were being mistreated when they first immigrated here, there were a lot of Black activists and Black leftists who were there to sort of support us. So I try to tell a lot of Asian people, it's like, sticking up for Black people. It's not even about us wanting to, get a cut out of their slice or anything like that.
yeah, yeah,
It's more just like, hey man, like we have to recognize that, the like the systems that are sort of holding so many of us down and preventing us from accelerating have always been white supremacist systems. It's like
yeah,
the reason why Asian immigration has been limited wasn't a bunch of Black politicians. It was a bunch of white politicians. And I'm not trying to say like, okay, we need to go on this like tirade against white people, but I think it's just more about like, looking at the history and realizing that like Black people have always been the ones who have stood with us. Latinos have always been the ones who stood next to us, and I think that we need to be able to just communicate that with more Asian Americans. Now, switching lanes a little bit more. Jackfroot is, you guys are a brand that's been around for a really long time. You've been making a lot of progress, a lot as of recently. What does Jackfroot have planned coming this year? Like, what do you guys hope to accomplish with this platform, sort of in the long term?
So the next thing we're gonna be launching in a couple of weeks is an online merch store, kind of like I wouldn't say we're like an Obey, but let me see what else is out there. There's LRG. They had a lot of good designs. There's a
Yeah,
brand
yeah,
out
yeah.
there that's there's a brand called Adapt that's still going on,
Mm-hmm.
but I feel like me and Kai were kind of like designers, or we had like a lot of visions and ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, we were supposed to launch this a couple years ago, but then all that stuff got in the way.
Yeah.
But finally, now we're putting together a lot of designs that have to do with culture and really tying things together to kind of make people embrace where they're from, and kind of like a lot of parodies, comedy, and just random things that really make people remember like their roots, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the first, second generation kids, the younger people that are growing up today, they're as you grow older, you're melting and blending in with a lot of different cultures, and we want to remind people that you should never forget where you came from,
Definitely.
and just to empower your ethnicity. The next thing that we're going to be working on is a lot of more content and videos. So as in documentaries, films, and just storytelling in a different way. And one of
Mm.
my goals is to produce, because I've shot film and videos, and I've done like, at least I've been shooting videos since 2005, maybe 2004, so
Mm-hmm.
a long time. And I
Mm-hmm.
want to get back into the real true storytelling aspect, whether it's like telling a story about, let's say, Daniel Day Kim, or telling a real life East Side San Jose story, right?
Hmm.
So raw, like I even have an interview from 2017 with Asians Never Die that I haven't edited yet. So
Wow.
it's just core content like that, original content that we want to start leaking out, like untold stories.
Good, man. I'm really excited for that because as someone who has worked with different Asian American and Asian news media outlets, I'm always interested to hear what other platforms are looking to do. Um, especially if you're looking to do something different, especially if you're looking to tell a lot more of these raw stories that are sort of unheard of.
Yeah.
Now, David, I've had a lot of fun talking to you. You've given us a lot of insight, and I'm glad that you know told us a little bit more about the story of Jackfroot. Before we have you head out, can you tell us what you're working on and where we can find you guys?
Um, right now we're going to be launching an online store on June 8th, and then you guys can just find us on Instagram. Just follow Jackfruit right now. You'll
Oh,
see all the updates.
awesome, awesome. Well, Davian, we'd love to have you back some other time, and we'll definitely keep in touch. And I hope all the best for your platform, man. All the
Right.
best.
Thank you.
All right,
It was fun today.
all right. Thanks,
Nice
Davian.
talking to you.